Welcome, one and all, to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman, and it is a pleasure to be with you once again. And this actually, let's see here. This is actually the 4-month anniversary, no, 3-month anniversary of one of my favorite shows that we've done under the Hammer Territory banner, the 3-man episode that we did back at the end of July, talking about the MLB trade deadline. That was the last time I had the pleasure of sharing a mic and now a screen with Stephen Tolbert and Scott Coleman, Shawn Coleman, Scott Coleman. Got that straight,
No
guys.
relation. No relation.
No. For Scott's sake, there is no relation. I'm sure he thinks. I'm sure he's grateful every day. But hey, pleasure to be with y'all once again. Thanks so much for tuning in with us here at Hammer Territory, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Scott, Stephen, how are y'all this evening?
Hey, Shawn, I'm doing great, buddy. It is nice to do one of these with you all. And tonight, clearly, we are going to be talking about what all of America has been talking about this week. Some Atlanta Braves trade targets and nothing else. And we got plenty of stuff to talk about. Offseason is in full swing, and always a pleasure when we can do one of these 3-man shows.
Yeah, what's up, Shawn? Obviously, good to be with you again. Obviously, these 3-man shows are a lot of fun to do. We've done a few different versions of them now. Scott and I have done one with Brad. We've done one with you before. So, but yeah, this is always a fun topic. Trade targets are always one of the biggest topics. You know, all of us are on Twitter. You know, this is kind of what people love to talk about is potential targets and guys who would make sense for the Braves. And we're the same way. We enjoy talking about this stuff as well. We do a lot of it in our DMs where we talk, we throw names back and forth. So we thought, let's do a show where we, throw out some targets that make sense for the Braves. So this will be a fun show. I'm looking forward to this one.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, Stephen, looking forward to it. Again, I'll say it. I've said it for years, and I'll say it for years more. Two of the best minds and just insights when it comes to the Braves. Scott and Stephen always love getting to pick y'all's brains when it comes to discussing the Braves. But before we get into specific targets, I do think that it's important to set the stage a bit with a couple of current Braves and their statuses that could impact what exactly the Braves are looking for, what aspects of this Braves team that they may be looking to fill through trades. And of course, I'm speaking of Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna Jr. It was basically revealed over the past 24 hours or so that Alex Anthopoulos just basically was transparent and said, no, we do not expect Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna Jr. to be available to start the season. Now, it's not necessarily that surprising to hear that, but I think part of what Alex is trying to do is just, remove any anticipation, hype, whatever. Going into the offseason, the preparation is that we're not going to have a full season of Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna Jr. Scott, it makes sense coming off of their injuries, but I want to add a bit more context to this. Again, you call it speculation, what have you. I'm just kind of reading the tea leaves. I feel like that it's not only about the fact that we won't have Strider and Acuna available within itself. They're not going to be available to start the season, but I think that what people need to realize also, there's a very realistic possibility that for next season, we may not get the ace Spencer Strider and the MVP level Ronald Acuna Jr. that we're all used to because of the injuries that they're coming off of.
Yeah, it has, now that we know with pretty high certainty that the front office does not expect Acuna or Strider on opening day, I think it really just hammers home the point that the outfield and the starting rotation are gigantic questions for this team over the next few months, and really underscores the importance of adding one, if not multiple, at both of those spots. And not only are the Braves going to get Acuna back in, who knows? It could be 2 weeks into the season. It could be 2 months into the season. It could be somewhere in between. But I think it's also important to remember that the last time we watched Ronald Acuna Jr. play baseball over a full season, he was probably the best player on planet Earth. The fact now that he's going to be coming back from his second knee surgery, and we saw when he came back in 2022, he was just not the same player that we've come to know and love so much. I think you really have to kind of rein in your expectations. And the fact is, we just don't know, and the Braves don't know what he is going to be able to do in the outfield. And everything I just said basically applies to Spencer Strider, because pitchers who have had 2 major elbow surgeries in 6-7 years now, it is not a long list of pitchers who have come back and done it at a high level.
And Stephen, I'll add to this. 12 months ago, we were in this same spot, right? Like going into last offseason, pitching was obviously an area of need. Outfield was an area of need. The Braves did well in going out and getting some surprise targets, some who paid off far better than anybody could expected, like Chris Sale and Ronaldo Lopez. Some who didn't live up to the expectations necessarily, like Jared Kelnick. But it's kind of, it's kind of just a bit of a sigh, a bit of a like, here we go again. We're in the same spot, needing an outfielder and a starting pitcher as two primary targets for this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, you can make the argument that even if Acuna was healthy, that you need an outfielder. That's how bad Jared Kelnick was last year. And they needed him to be good. They needed him for lineup balance. They went out and specifically targeted a left-handed hitter for more lineup balance, and he wasn't good. And, so even if Acuna was healthy, you could make this argument that this is still a big need. Left field, it seems like it's been a need for the Braves for like 4 years running now. And then on the starting pitching side, listen, it's a little worrisome when 36-year-old Chris Sale is at the moment one of your most reliable starters. And that's kind of where the Braves are right now. Spencer Swellenbach just threw more innings than he's ever thrown in his life. Ronaldo Lopez was a reliever for 2 or 3 years, and this past year threw more innings than he's thrown in that time frame. And then you have Chris Sale, for the first time in 5 or 6 years, throwing as many innings as he did. And those are the 3 guys that you're kind of counting on as we sit here today. And then you've got guys like Griffin Canning, who they just acquired. We'll see if they keep them. You got all the guys in AAA, the Ian Andersons, the Smith Shalvers, all those guys. It's very easy to see why the Braves need another starting pitcher. Last year at this time, they had, or at least they thought they had, Max Fried and Spencer Strider on deck for the season. And then they picked up Charlie Morton's option. And you felt like you had a really good 1, 2, 3. And, I thought the Braves might go internal for the 5th spot. So really they only needed 1 guy, and they ended up going and getting 2 guys in Ronaldo and Chris Sale. But you can make the argument that the need is even dire now. I can really make the argument they should go get 2 starters. It's very expensive to do, and I don't know if they'll be able to. But just on need, I could certainly make that argument. So, with these 2 injuries, the level of players that we're talking about, we were talking just before the show started, like you can make a very strong argument that the 2 biggest needs the Braves now have are starting pitcher and an outfielder of some regard that can balance out your lineup. So yeah, these 2 injuries and the updates we've gotten are significant. And I do think they have an impact on what they're going to do in the offseason, because like Scott said, we don't know when we're going to get these guys back. And like you said, Sean, we don't know what kind of version we're going to get when they do come back. So the Braves need to add some depth in these positions, probably as a number 1 priority.
So then let's expand the conversation a bit as we get into, starting to look at some of the trade targets that may make sense for the Braves. And Scott, the thing that I'll say about it is this: we don't necessarily know when we're going to get Strider or Acuna back. We don't know what version of those players we're going to get back when they come back. 2 players that we know are not coming or have a very good chance of not coming back are Max Fried and Charlie Morton. Now, there may be a chance that we get Morton back. But the thing that's intriguing about all this is the fact that as good as Chris Sale was, as good as Ronaldo Lopez was, the Braves have a lot of question marks or are losing a lot of talent when it comes to their starting staff. So you really do have a reason for the Braves to potentially once again and go out and make a major move to add to their starting staff. And one name that's out there that has been connected to the Braves in the past, we know that the Braves have a history of trading with the Chicago White Sox. Last year, the Braves were rumored to be in on Dylan Cease quite a bit, but this time around, it's Garrett Crochet from the University of Tennessee, by the way. Garrett Crochet is a very that's national champion volunteers, Stephen. But getting back to Garrett Crochet, very popular trade target. Many teams are going to be in on him. Probably going to be a pretty steep cost. But Scott, there's a reason the Braves could go get him. What are your thoughts on the Braves potentially revisiting those talks for a pitcher of the level of Garrett Crochet?
Yeah, there was a report that came out today on Thursday that Buster only mentioned the Atlanta Braves as a team who could go out and get Crochet, and only mentioned that the Braves were interested at the trade deadline. And of course, Chicago decided to hold on to him. And the fact is, the White Sox are so weirdly run that we might think the Braves would be kind of on the outside looking in terms of what kind of package of prospects they could give to get Crochet. But the White Sox are so weird that who knows? I mean, they might be super enamored with, I don't know, AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop, or pick some prospect who we like, but maybe the White Sox are just over the moon for. And for Crochet, I mean, we saw it in like the first week of the season last year before we knew he was going to break out. Crochet absolutely mauled the Atlanta Braves in Chicago. I know it was freezing cold, but I mean, that was back when the Braves were still hitting. It wasn't even like he got him in the June and July where they couldn't hit my fastball. I mean, he just mowed the Braves down. It's going to be a high asking price, but you're talking about a legitimate frontline starting pitcher. Crochet was so good last season. And if the front office thinks they're going to need another frontline arm to replace Max Fried and the uncertainty of Strider, and of course, any starting pitcher can get hurt, if they could put together an enticing enough package for the White Sox to get Crochet, I would be all for it. I don't think that's a bold or a hot take, and be interested to hear what you guys think. But nonetheless, I would imagine in the coming weeks, we will hear the Braves connected to Crochet quite a bit.
Yeah. And I think a big part of this is that if you guys remember back in around the trade deadline, there was this report that he was only going to play. He was going to sit out if he didn't get a contract extension. That was going to be a requirement for any team that traded for him. And if you guys remember, one of the few teams that still held negotiations with the White Sox after that came out was the Braves. And that's not a surprise, of course, because the Braves would love to sign anybody to a contract extension. That is Alex's sweet spot.
Yeah.
That's music to his ears. And so, and there are teams that will get turned off by that because he's a pitcher. He's had health issues before. He throws hard. There's a little bit of Chris Sale in his game. Quite honestly, White Sox left-hander power. But the Braves aren't an organization that's going to scare off. And so it is interesting to me because the Braves have a need. They could use a little more youth in their rotation. They've got 36-year-old Chris Sale. They got 34-year-old Ronaldo Lopez. Charlie Morton comes back. He's like 40, 41. Adding a 25-year-old is probably a pretty good idea. He's got multiple years of control. I think he's got 3 years of control coming up. So, yeah, the contract extension matters in this conversation, of course, but the Braves are not a team that's going to scare off. So it is a really interesting idea. Like Scott said, it's going to be very expensive. I'm guessing, it would take them really loving Drake Baldwin. I think Drake Baldwin would probably have to be involved in that deal. I know that would really piss off a lot of Braves fans, but like these are the types of guys that you trade your number one prospect for. I can't imagine a world where the Braves could do that trade without including their best prospect, but it's speculation. Of course, that's what this entire show is going to be, is speculation. But, there's been a national report connecting the Braves to this guy. There's clear need. There's a clear match. It is interesting. And I would love it if it happened. You have to see what the price was, but just on need, just on talent, just on profile, I'm a fan of going after Garrett Crochet, despite the fact that he went to Tennessee. We won't hold that against him at all. But he is a fantastic pitcher.
Because he went to the University of Tennessee, but that's beside the point. To me, I always like these conversations because then you get into the multiple personalities of Alex Anthopoulos and his history, right? And I like to label it Toronto Alex and Atlanta Alex, right? Toronto Alex, Garrett Crochet seems to be a Toronto Alex type move. Pay whatever costs to go get a guy, extend him. You've got a young guy entering his prime to lead your staff in what you hope is continuing to be a long-term World Series window. But Atlanta Alex is a bit more reserved. He's not necessarily someone who's going to go pay high price to get it done. We've not seen him do that as of yet. But I do agree with y'all that if there was a time to do it, right now would be it. You're losing Max Fried. You have plenty of questions about your starting staff. I think right now would be the time to do it. if there weren't other options that Alex is a bit more familiar with going with in recent years. For instance, if the Braves had not seen Spencer Swellenbach emerge as a breakout star this year, I think the need to go get Garrett Crochet is significantly higher. But Scott, I'll throw it to you first because I do think when it comes to adding a starting pitcher, there is a much more familiar avenue for Alex Anthopoulos to go down. If Max Fried is gone, if Charlie Morton is gone, we potentially have $30+ million open that could be allotted towards a starting pitcher. And I think that there are several veterans out there that the Braves could get at a reasonable cost. And that is much more Alex's play in recent years. Now, we've heard him connected to Nathan Eovaldi in free agency. Jeff Hoffman, who shares the same agency with Renato Lopez, he could potentially turn from a reliever to a starter. That may be something of interest to them. But Scott, I know there is a name you are ready to talk about who really fits the Braves mold, and let's open it up as a roundtable. I think there's several names that could fit this mold, this 15 to 20 million veteran starting pitcher that the Braves could get in a reasonable cost that they could bring into the rotation and really help to bolster it. But go ahead with the first idea that you have to fit that need.
Yeah. So, listeners of the show for a while now know that I have been a Sonny Gray fan for a long time. And I think if the St. Louis Cardinals decide to sell or do a mini rebuild or retool, I would presumably think they'd be looking to move on from Sonny Gray. One note, just right off the top, is that Sonny Gray is owed a lot of money. He is owed $25 million next year and $35 million in 2026 and has a team option for 2027. But Sonny Gray has been worth that money without any shadow of a doubt the last couple of seasons. The last 2 years, Gray has made 60 starts. He is third in all of baseball in WAR among starting pitchers, only trailing Zach Wheeler and Webb out in San Francisco. And in those 60 starts, Logan Webb, I couldn't remember Logan's name, Logan Webb. And in those 60 starts, Sonny Gray, a 3.29 ERA and an even better 2.95 FIP. He continues to get a lot of strikeouts. He doesn't walk a lot of hitters, doesn't give up a ton of home runs. And while he's 35, I mean, he's not a young man by any means, but he's not ancient and has been pretty healthy the last few years. So if St. Louis decides to do a rebuild of some kind, sign me up. Sonny Gray, he would be a terrific front-end addition to the rotation. And because he's owed so much money, would probably not cost a ton for prospects for the Braves in order to get him.
Yeah, honestly, Sonny Gray is extremely good. I love Sonny Gray. I don't love Sonny Gray as much as Scott loves Sonny Gray, but Sonny Gray is a very good pitcher. The fact that he's owed so much money is a double-edged sword, right? It's a high risk because if he gets hurt, that's a big chunk of your payroll that is giving you nothing. But because he's owed so much money, the Cardinals would probably be happy just to get off the contract. There's not a lot of surplus value there. They can't really be expecting anything of note in return. If a team just takes the money, then they're probably just going to say, have at it. My guess was what it would probably look like is more of a we'll pay down X amount of dollars if you give us X level prospect.
Yeah.
That's typically how these trades work. It's usually doing it that way allows you to have more teams in the negotiation because more teams can handle that versus taking the entire contract, which not a lot of teams can do that, especially like Scott said, it's a backloaded deal. 2026 gets very expensive. I like it. I would have to see the details. I have to see what St. Louis pays down. The tricky thing for us, obviously on the public side, is we don't know what the other options Alex is considering. So it's tough to compare and contrast, but if you like to hang on to your prospects, and the Braves don't have a lot of them, and this is important, if you like to hang on to your top prospects, then this is the kind of deal you should probably be looking at, is something that's not going to cost prospects. It's going to cost money, and money renews every year, and prospects don't. So, that's a variable here. And I could definitely see it. Sonny Gray is definitely a Braves type pitcher. I know that's why Scott loves him so much, because it kind of just seems like he is a Braves kind of pitcher. Like you could see a world where he's wearing a Braves uniform very easily. And having him and Chris Sale in a potential playoff rotation is very attractive. He's been pretty durable. I know he's had some injuries in the past, but lately he's been pretty durable. So yeah, I could see it. I don't hate the idea.
Well, the good thing is that, of course, with the offseason being here, is that all teams are potentially looking to will and deal. And Sonny Gray, I agree, is a very attractive option. He would seem to be a very Chris Sale type move. But I do want to throw out a few other names that are possibly a bit cheaper, 1 to 2 years left on their contracts, and you could see the teams that they're on having reason to potentially trade them. Now, I'll start out with former friend, 2018 trade deadline, maybe the first notable name that Alex Anthopoulos got as the Braves GM, and that's Kevin Gausman, the Toronto Blue Jays. He's got a couple of years left. Justin Toscano, Gabe Burns had a great article out with the AJC where they talked about him. They also mentioned 2023 postseason hero for the Texas Rangers, Jordan Montgomery, who obviously had a pretty disappointing lost season in Arizona, owed $22 million on his last year of his deal. Doesn't necessarily seem to be in the best of graces with Arizona. Could they move him potentially?
Yeah. Did you just, sorry to cut, by the way, Jordan Montgomery, did you catch what the owner of the Diamondbacks said about Jordan Montgomery? That it was like he basically came out and said in as many words that signing Jordan Montgomery to $22 million was a gigantic waste of money and his time. I cannot can you imagine if Alex Anthopoulos or whoever's running Liberty Media came out and said, that Cole Hamels, I can't believe we gave that bum $20 million. Like what?
Well, not only that, he'd said that about a guy who still had a player option that was to be determined. Like, it's one thing if you just say that about a guy who's walking out the door. He hadn't walked out the door yet. He's coming back.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that was one of the dumbest things. I like, is that guy never seen a microphone before? Like, you're going to have, like, honestly, if I was Jordan Montgomery, I would have picked up that player option out of spite. Even if I didn't want to be there, I'd be like, you know what, asshole, you going to talk about me like that? You're going to pay me $22 million next year. And I don't know if that's why he did it, but when I saw he picked up that option, I laughed. I laughed so hard.
Yeah. Sorry, Shawn, not to cut you off. I just had to mention that if folks maybe only follow the Braves or missed it a few weeks ago, I again, crazy stuff.
Crazy.
And the other name I was going to throw out is Jamison Talion, who is, the Braves were very much linked to Zach Eflin of the Tampa Bay Rays last year, eventually traded to the Baltimore Orioles. If you go to baseballsavant.com, a great tool that they have is Player Similarity. The top comparable for Zach Eflin is Jamison Talion. Could the Cubs look to move off him if they want to be free agent players? Pretty durable guy. My whole point is that we talked about a couple of different scenarios. There are plenty of scenarios out there where the Braves, yes, the cost would be high in terms of money, but it may be low in terms of prospect. And that has kind of been the avenue Alex has taken in the past. I think if they're looking to make a notable addition to the starting rotation, this may be the avenue that they go. Is there any name out there that stands out among the rest besides Sonny Gray for y'all?
I'll throw it to Steven here because I'm curious to get his take on this player. But Kevin Gausman was interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned him, Shawn. The Braves, I mean, he's been flat out awesome in prior seasons. And Toronto probably needs to do a rebuild. I know they've been connected a little bit to Juan Soto, but it would be a reunion with Gausman. But I am intrigued at least at maybe seeing what the cost would be and buying low because it looks like he's under contract through 2026 at $22 million, and that's more than reasonable for an arm like his.
Yeah, Gausman's fascinating because we know for a fact that Alex Anthopoulos has interest in him because he's traded for him before. And Gausman is Gausman's certainly been a better pitcher since he left the Braves than before he was acquired by the Braves the first time. And so there's definitely a profile there that for a fact that Alex likes. It's $22 million a year, which is kind of a sweet spot for the Braves. If you kind of look at like where they sit their top end guys at, everybody, the highest salary on the team is $22 million. Sale makes that. Riley makes that. And I think Olsen makes that.
Yep.
And those are the highest paid guys on the team. And so that does fit. Jordan Montgomery is also right in that salary range, so that would fit as well. But yeah, Gausman, out of those names, Gausman is definitely the interesting one. You know, Toronto is just in such a weird spot because they have Vlad Jr. for one more year. They have Bichette for one more year. And there's an argument they're like the 5th best team in that division. If everything goes right, though, like they have enough talent, like just George Springer has fallen off the planet. Jose Barrios has not been as good as he was in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Dante Bichette, I mean, even Bichette, you know, himself had the worst year of his career last year. Otherwise, he probably would have been traded at the deadline. He's just so bad they couldn't get anything for him, and they probably can't get anything for him this winter. So I don't know what Toronto's going to do. If you told me for sure Toronto's going to look to move off some money, then Gausman might be at the top of my list, honestly, because I think that's another guy you could probably get without having to give up too much in terms of prospects. There's a profile that the Braves clearly like. That's an interesting name for sure. I just don't know what Toronto's going to do. I don't know if you guys have an opinion on it, but I can't guarantee that Toronto's going to sell anything. They might just say, you know, we got these guys for one more year. We're going to go all in for one more year and just, you know, tear it down after that. I don't know what they're going to do, but Gausman's a fascinating name.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm glad you threw in Bo Bichette. I mean, we're going to talk about shortstops a little bit tonight, but you know, Bichette you would be buying as low as you can buy on a player after all the injuries and just flat out underperformance Bichette had last year. But if you guys tell me that at some point we get the blue square saying the Braves and Blue Jays have made a deal this winter, that feels like a real possibility.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that that's kind of going to be a theme of this whole, you know, show is that there's certain teams that are going to have multiple trade targets that make sense for the Braves, the Blue Jays, the Cardinals, among other, the White Sox. And, you know, we know that Anthopoulos has had connections with these teams in the past when it comes to trades, but I think we've done a pretty good job kind of cornering the starting pitching market as to multiple names that can make sense. But the other big need, of course, is outfield. And Scott, the thing that comes to mind for me is that the Braves have a long-term option in center that I think anybody would be envious of, and Michael Harris II. Ronald Acuna Jr., yes, he's coming off injury, but he was MVP in 2023. I think that he'll eventually get back, at least offensively, you know, to what he was, maybe a little bit less speed. They, of course, went out and got Jarred Kelenic last offseason. I don't think he lived up to expectations, but the overall thought is that the Braves are still going to give him an opportunity. So it brings the interesting question to place. They need an outfielder. They likely need a left-handed hitting outfielder. But is it an outfielder who they potentially try to go for a one-year veteran as a stopgap and refigure it out next year long-term? Or do they potentially try to go get another pretty relevant, significant commodity that they can control for multiple years? I think you could go either way. What are your thoughts with how what direction the Braves should go in the outfield?
So let me ask you, Steven, because you were tweeting about this the other day, and then we'll talk about a couple of outfielders they could trade for. But what do you think this team thinks of Jarred Kelenic after one season, with the idea that you are bringing in a new hitting coach, an accomplished hitting coach who might be able to help him? But the fact is, you know, Kelenic is I think 1,400 plate appearances into his career now. The fact is, he hasn't hit, and two teams have traded him already. So where are you guys at with Kelenic? Because I think he is kind of an interesting piece to this whole puzzle.
Yeah. You talk about fascinating things I would love to know. Like, this might be at the top of the list, is where internally they are on Jarred Kelenic. Because, like, for me, and I did tweet this out the other day, but like, once you start getting up to like 1,500, 2,000 plate appearances, the amount of improvement that you make is a lot less than people think. Like, there's not a ton, you know, this is a bit of like the Dansby Swanson thing, but like, there's just not a ton of growth after that. Like, you kind of are who you are. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. There are certainly guys who have, you know, figure out at age 30 and have tremendous careers after that, but those are more outliers than they are the rule. And, you know, the bottom line is Jarred Kelenic's almost at 1,500 plate appearances for his career. He's got a career 86 WRC plus. He's got a strikeout rate in the 30s for his career. You know, a walk rate in the single digits. Like, there are some massive, massive red flags about his profile. Like you said, he's been traded twice. That's people don't think about that, but that's actually a pretty big red flag in its own right. Teams don't really give up on these type of guys if they think they're the next Ronald Acuna Jr. And so if it were me, if it's my team, if I'm king of the Braves, there's not a chance that I'm running Jared Kelenic back out there as my starter. I'm not even running him out there as the strong side of a platoon, because if you platoon him, he's going to get 400 or 500 plate appearances. And I don't know if you want Jared Kelenic taking 500 plate appearances for you in left field. He is a good defender. He's a good backup center fielder, but that's not what you need in a left fielder. You need somebody who can hit. And especially when the Braves, he's one of the only left-handers in the lineup outside of Olsen and Harris. You need a guy who can hit in that spot. So if it were me, I would not depend on Jared Kelenic going into next year. I don't know if Sean feels differently. I don't know if you feel differently, Scott, but I would not depend on Jared Kelenic in 2025.
He's a perfect fourth outfielder, right? Especially for a team that needs left-handed hitting with upside, with considerable upside. He can defend all three positions. He does well, I think, most of the time in the corner positions. And if he ever figures it out, if we can ever see Jared Kelenic take the first 2 months of 2023 and put it over a full season, you've got a very valuable 3, maybe 4-win player. But the likelihood of that happening with each passing season that it doesn't happen is not there. So I think that Jared Kelenic, especially with the control that you have for him, it's nice to have him as a fourth outfielder. I think he's certainly a part of the team, but he's no one that gets in the way of you going to add another controllable outfielder if the deal makes sense. I think that's the way to look at it. And if he forces his hand, great. It's a good problem to have, but let him do that, and you plan on making a deal for another relevant outfielder that you feel is going to put you in a better position as a starter.
Well, and the fact is, we talked about Acuna off the jump. I mean, Jared Kelenic might be starting in right field or left field just out of pure necessity for however long to begin the season. And that does kind of give you another chance to see him for 100 plate appearances or something like that. And hey, if Kelenic comes out of the gate and he's carrying a 140 WRC plus and he's driving the ball and he's walking, not striking out all the time, like that, like you said, that is a non-problem. You find ways to figure it out, especially with the uncertainty of Acuna. But for all of those reasons, I do think they have to add an outfielder this winter. And on the topic of who the Braves could trade for, there's a player who I really wanted to bring up tonight. Again, he kind of falls in the same bucket because he is a teammate of Sonny Gray, and we are not certain that the Cardinals are going to sell or retool. But Lars Nootbaar, who is like an all-time name. I mean, he sounds like a villain in Star Wars or something like that. But Lars Nootbaar, really a good hitter so far with the Cardinals, but he's kind of like a StatCast god. His exit velocity numbers are fantastic. He's underperformed considerably the last few years. Like his expected WOBA is really high. Again, he's a patient hitter too, which is something this lineup just does not have a ton of. One of the lowest swing rates outside of the strike zone of any qualified hitter in baseball last season. And the idea of working in, because Steven is the king of this, the idea of working in a couple of left-handed bats to this lineup to help balance things out really, to me, should be a priority. And Nootbaar is a lefty. He can play the corners. He's a solid defender. He's a middle-of-the-lineup bat. He's 27 years old, so you're getting him for his prime years. And again, if the Cardinals are willing to move him, I would give up a lot to get Nootbaar. And maybe that's not like a shocking take, but the fact is he has not been a superstar to this point with St. Louis, but he just feels like a breakout is coming at any given point if he can just kind of put it all together for a full season.
Yeah. I love Lars Nootbaar so much. Like, he is such a good hitter. He's got like I think he's got like a 350 career on base percentage. He's got like a 13% career walk rate.
Yeah.
Like Scott said, he's got tremendous plate discipline, which this team desperately needs. They need guys who know how to take bad pitches and swing at good pitches. I think playing in Truist Park, where that short porch and left, would help him, achieve. Like Scott said, he's had a couple of years of underperforming his batted balls. St. Louis is more of a neutral park, if not a pitcher's park. I think it would help him to move to Truist. No, he's fantastic. I love Lars Nootbaar. The Cardinals are fascinating because it did not work. It did not work last year. They've really, if you read Cardinals fans, they're kind of, the sky is falling. That's kind of their mindset the last couple of years because it's not gone well. And I thought they might turn over the entire front office. And I thought they'd turn over the entire coach staff. And I thought that there's a chance they might burn the whole thing down and just completely rebuild it. I don't know if they will, but it's out there. I mean, people are talking about them getting rid of Sonny Gray, about trying to get off Nolan Arenado's money. Paul Goldschmidt's a free agent. They're not going to bring him back. Once you lose all that talent, at some point, you might as well just go ahead and strip it down to the studs. And if that happens, then the Cardinals have a couple of guys, Nootbaar maybe at the top of the list, that teams are going to be very interested in. And like Scott said, it would cost a lot because this guy's got multiple years of control. He's very good. But this is what the Braves need, in my opinion. If not this guy, then this type of guy. Left-handed, really good plate discipline, really good power numbers. You can literally bat him anywhere you want in the lineup and you're fine. He doesn't have to bat, 8th or 9th. I'm so tired of hearing about, well, this guy could bat in 8th or 9th in the Braves lineup and be fine. Like, we have enough of those. Like, we need somebody who can bat 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, anywhere there's a hole that night. I would love to get more left-handed in the lineup. Yeah, I love Lars Nootbaar. It would cost a lot. How I would feel about the trade would very much come down to what they had to give up to get him. But he's exactly the type of hitter the Braves need to add.
And we're all about adding names to the collection of potential options, right? Because I agree with y'all. Lars Nootbaar would be at the top of my list. But a couple of American League East teams stand out to me with a couple of potential targets that may make sense. There have been reports that the Boston Red Sox could potentially look to try to deal from a position of strength, which is good left-handed hitters, to add to another part of their team. And I think that Boston is always looking for pitching, right? You've got Jaron Duran, who came off a very good season last year. Their top hitting prospect, Roman Anthony, one of the top prospects of the game, is a left-handed hitting prospect. But Wilyer Abreu, who I think came out of nowhere as being one of the better overall outfielders in the American League, won a Gold Glove, unbelievable arm in right field, showed some very good potential at the plate, some good power, good patience, does strike out a lot, very long-term control. But if Boston, and they know the Braves system from the Chris Sale trade, that just happened last offseason, if they like one of our young arms, could that young arm potentially be the center of a package to go get a Wilyer Abreu? Maybe that makes sense. I don't know y'all's thoughts on that level of player. Probably less likely than like a Lars Nootbaar, but another option. And another name that's always intrigued me, he's had a couple of down seasons, but if we're talking about the Toronto Blue Jays potentially looking to rebuild, Dalton Varsho, I think, has showed some intriguing numbers, some intriguing talent in the past, exceptional athlete, unbelievable defender. Braves may not necessarily need that with Michael Harris out in the outfield, but if you want to take a one-year chance on him, I think that that's something. He could be a guy that we've seen the Braves do before. They could unlock some potential in him. So a couple of other left-handed names that may not necessarily take all the farm to get, but could certainly be intriguing as targets.
Yeah, I looked at Wilyer Abreu. I remember looking at him at the trade deadline last year when we were thinking that the Braves were going to add an outfielder and not a DH. I remember going through his profile, an unbelievably good outfield defender, really strong arm. I think he was a rookie last year, so he's still got like 6 years of team control. I don't think he's a free agent till like 2030 or 2031. But I have read a lot about the Red Sox this offseason about how they have the opposite problem. They're too left-handed. They don't like how left-handed they are in their lineup. They've got Duran, they got Devers, they got Cassis, they got Yoshida. They've got some prospects coming up that are left-handed. They want to get more right-handed. And, if you've already got those guys in the lineup, do you have a place for a guy like Abreu, even though he's young and cheap? If you want more balance, then you don't really have a spot for him. And so another guy that would not be cheap to get, the Red Sox are almost certainly going to try to compete next year. So I doubt they would just give you him for prospects. I don't know what that trade would look like. I don't know if the Red Sox are still they might still be sour about how the Chris Sale trade worked out relative to how Vaughn Grissom worked out. I don't know if they're going to be in a hurry to deal with Alex again, but yeah, listen, if they like some of the Braves young pitchers, if they love Hurston Waldrop, I don't know, I'm just throwing out a name, somebody who's close to the majors that could potentially help them in 2025. I could see that. But Abreu is a really interesting guy. It is fascinating to me that the Red Sox are trying to get more right-handed. The Braves are trying to get more left-handed. There is a potential match there. Varsho, I don't know quite as much about, quite honestly. And again, I don't know what Toronto's going to do. But Abreu is a guy that I looked at. I liked a lot at the trade deadline. And we'll just see what the Red Sox do. And if they can find a match with the Braves for something that would help them in 2025, because they're almost certainly going to try to compete.
Yeah, we talked about the left field wheel in Atlanta for the last however many years.
Yeah.
Eddie Rosario wasn't really that guy. Of course, Alex remade his outfield over in 2021. Kelnick, not great. Laureano, nice season and a godsend for what he gave the lineup, but I don't think Laureano is a long-term piece. We'll see if they tender him a deal. Abreu would be interesting really just from the fact that he is presumably a long-term core piece. Yeah. If Alex kind of wants to stop that carousel in left field, you would have to pay up. I mean, don't get me wrong, man. You would have to give up a lot for a controllable, young, talented outfielder who can do a little bit of everything. But if it means that you have solidified your left field spot for the next 5 to 10 seasons, those are the kind of moves where I really don't flinch too much at trading, 2 or 3 of your top prospects, because the likelihood is you're going to be fine as long as the player just doesn't start forgetting how to play baseball, and that's unlikely. And then on, Shawn, you mentioned Varsho. He's mildly interesting, a fantastic defender. I don't know if he hits enough necessarily to warrant an everyday middle of the lineup or lower middle lineup spot. But I think probably the overall point that we should make tonight is I would love to see like the whiteboard. They probably don't use a whiteboard anymore, but the whiteboard in Alex's office with every single player they have checked in on and where they rank in like a totem pole, if you will, of this player's number 1, this player's 2, this player's 3, if they're willing to eat some contract, and get an idea of how they are prioritizing and what they're prioritizing in terms of young, old, left versus right-handed, all of those things.
And I'll say this. One good thing about Kelnick is that he is good enough defensively that if he has to play right field, so like the Braves have to figure out right field for the next, maybe 2 months starting in 2025. Maybe it's only a month, but you kind of have to plan like it's going to be, you have to plan for worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And Kelnick being good enough defensively does help because now you don't have to factor that in. If you go get a guy, you can play him in left. It does open up some guys who maybe aren't great because Kelnick is good enough to play right field and has a strong enough arm to play right field. That is a variable that matters here. And, they could potentially go out and get some weaker defenders. You got to be careful because when Acuna comes back, you don't know how good of a defender he's going to be out there and you don't want to run Michael Harris to death. But Jared Kelnick being a good defensive outfielder does help in this situation where he's probably, like Scott said earlier, one way or the other, he's probably going to have to play at least until Acuna comes back, unless they go get a bunch of outfielders this offseason. As it stands now, he's probably going to get at least 100 or so plate appearances in the first month of the season. And the fact that he can play right field helps.
So then let's tie the potential need for an outfielder with another position that I know many are going to talk about when it comes to the Braves this offseason, and that, of course, is shortstop. One of the most popular Braves in terms of conversation last year was Orlando Arcia, but it wasn't for the most positive of reasons. Orlando Arcia definitely not the best of seasons when it came to offense. It was especially the case when it seemed like every game he came up with a big run scoring opportunity, and it did not work out much more often than it did. But I will say this about Arcia. The Braves certainly seem to value defense at the shortstop position. And I think that they're satisfied with Arcia's defense. I don't know if his offense means that they should keep on valuing him as a starter, but I think at the very least they know they have something there. But the reason I say tie the outfield to the shortstop position is when you look at what potentially is out there in the trade market for the shortstop position, there's just not a lot out there in terms of like actual, pure shortstops. If it's a left-handed hitting shortstop, it's a franchise type player that you're probably not going to want to pay the cost for.
Yeah.
So I think that opens up the conversation to something that the Braves have not had for a while that I really think could benefit them going forward. And that is a utility player that you could feel comfortable playing at multiple positions throughout the season. And when you open up that potential pool of players, there are some intriguing names out there that could make sense either in the middle infield or the outfield, and maybe even at shortstop. Scott, Steven, y'all got some names in mind that potentially could fill that role?
Yeah. So a guy I love, Willie Castro of the Twins. People probably don't know who that is. Quite honestly, Braves fans probably have no idea who that is. But the Twins are in a really interesting spot. So the Twins are one of the teams that are going through this big debacle with the TV money. They're a team that has spent aggressively the last couple of years. They gave Buxton a big extension. They signed Correa. They've given out a lot of money. And from what I've read this offseason, they're going to have to come off of some of that money. And Willie Castro. So Willie Castro is a 28-year-old utility guy. He played second base, shortstop, third base, left field, center field, and right field last year. Played them all pretty evenly in terms of distribution and played them all at a plus or above level defensively. So this is a guy who can literally play shortstop for you. And that's where he played most of the time last year was shortstop. And again, he played it as a plus defender. He's 28 years old. He's a switch hitter who hits better from the left side than he does the right side. So that does help your lineup balance, which is something I've tried to factor into all of this stuff. He's left-handed. He's got 2 more years of team control, which is why this matters. The Twins might be looking to move him anyways just because of his contract status. But he makes $6 million. And one problem for the Twins is they have Carlos Correa. They have Royce Lewis. They have Brooks Lee. They have Edward Julian. They have a lot of middle infielders. And Willie Castro is a guy, even though he can play over the field, he primarily plays shortstop, third base, second base. And because he's projected to make $6 million in arbitration next year, the Twins might look to move that because they need to spend that $6 million somewhere else. And listen, he's a guy that hits. He's got a 110 WRC plus the last 2 years. He's left-handed. He can play everywhere. He's a really good defender. He's a guy that can get on base. He doesn't strike out a ton. He's a guy I like. He's a guy I like a lot, and primarily because he can play shortstop. And if that happens again, where Orlando Arcia is the worst player in baseball, and let's be honest, that's a possibility. Orlando Arcia is not great, and there's a reason Orlando Arcia makes bench money, is because he's a bench player that the Braves have kind of forced into starting. A guy like Castro that can play left field and right field if Acuna's still hurt, but can also play shortstop. Play second base. Ozzy's had injury stuff the last couple of years. Can play third base. Riley had injury stuff. A guy like that is just hyper valuable, and all for $6 million. And again, the Twins might give you a pretty good deal on him because they're looking to move money anyways. This is one of those that from a lot of different angles makes sense. And I think somebody's going to trade for this guy this offseason. I would love for it to be the Braves. I think the Braves need more help at shortstop. I think they need more help on the infield altogether. They end up having to sign Whit Merrifield, Gio Urshela, just like in these emergency situations because they don't have a ton of prospects who are great in the upper minors. Infield Nacho Alvarez just clearly wasn't ready. They need more organizational depth in these spots. And this guy checks a ton of boxes. Very cheap, $6 million the Braves could easily do. They could certainly find a trade partner or, something that the Twins would want back in trade. I love this one. This is one of my favorites. Yeah. I think the Braves need to go get Willie Castro.
Yeah, Steven, as you were talking about him, Martin Prado kind of came to mind a little bit. Guy who can hit, guy who can play all over the diamond. You mentioned the cost, salary-wise, absolutely fits. They could add a player like Castro and then still go out and add an impact outfielder and an impact starting pitcher, maybe a reliever as well. I like Castro a lot. And, he is not a household name by any means. I think, you have to be a pretty big baseball fan in order to know Castro because he's not only not a household name, but he's overshadowed by Buxton and Correa and some of the bigger names in Minnesota. But yes, if the Twins are willing to move on from him, all about it. One other infielder who I at least wanted to mention on the show tonight for a team that may be looking to trade some infield depth as well is Nico Hoerner from the Chicago Cubs. Hoerner is kind of the opposite of what the Braves have in their lineup right now. He is, let's just pull up his numbers here. He has 2,300 plate appearances in his career, and he has 29 home runs. So this guy, not a power hitter. He's not hitting doubles and triples and just rocketing the baseball all over. But Hoerner does a lot of things well. He is terrific defensively, and he's really just kind of a contact, old school middle infielder who could play shortstop for the Braves. Similarly, I believe Hoerner is signed for 2 more seasons at about $11.5 million. He can really run, which is something I think I'd love to see the Braves add some speed and athleticism to this lineup. Hoerner's averaged about 40 stolen, maybe 35 stolen bases the last 2 years. Doesn't strike out a ton, gets on base at a decent enough clip. And if the Cubs decide they want to move on and make up some room in their middle infield, obviously they're tethered to Dansby Swanson for another 5 seasons. I think Hoerner is a player the Braves will at least try to have conversations on because he'd be a nice piece up the middle for his defense, and really speed as well is really something that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, another name. Go ahead, Steven.
Well, I was just going to say the Cubs are another interesting team because, Cody Bellinger opted into that big contract. There's been reports that the Cubs maybe need to move some money. When we were putting these lists together, I actually thought about Ian Happ, the left-handed hitter out of Chicago who makes a decent money. If maybe the Cubs needed to move something, if he was a guy that the Braves he's somebody I've liked for a long time, a really good on-base guy.
Yeah, me too.
I've liked, but so the Cubs are another interesting team who I think they're going to try to contend next year because they've spent money. They spent money on Dansby. They spent money on Bellinger, Suzuki. They've added some pitching. Sean earlier was talking about Talion. And the reason he was talking about this because I do think the Cubs need to move some money. And so, what would they want? I think they would want probably some major league help in return. Those trades are always trickier, but the Cubs are interesting. The Cubs are very interesting because the Cubs I could see the Cubs kind of buying and selling this offseason, trying to move money around while still trying to contend, similar to kind of what the Red Sox might do. Hoerner, I've always loved Hoerner. He's a really fun player. He's a throwback player. Scott is 100% right. This team needs more speed. The Braves desperately need more speed. It was just such a station-to-station slow team last year.
It was like watching me run the bases. It was awful.
Especially when they lost to Acuna and Harris. It was like watching refrigerators run around the bases. It was, it was brutal. So yeah, they need more speed. They need to get younger, in my opinion. I like Hoerner. I like Hoerner a lot. The Cubs are one of the teams I've circled this offseason because I'm just fascinated to see what they do. Even if it's not related to the Braves, I just want to see what they do this offseason because they're in a weird spot. They're not the best team in that division. The Brewers are really good. They have a lot of money in the books. So that's a team that could do quite a bit, and the Braves might be involved.
And speaking of teams that, are interesting to watch, it's both the teams that need to move off money, these teams that are rebuilding, but it's also these teams that the Braves are familiar with that they've done recent deals with. And when I say that, a spotlight goes to the Seattle Mariners, who the Braves had a lot of dealings with last year. And they have a shortstop named J.P. Crawford, who to me probably is not as intriguing as some of the names that we mentioned. He may not have as high of a ceiling, but he is affordable for 2 years. And I think that one thing that stands out, he's reliable at the plate in terms of getting on base. And that we talk about the Braves needing to get younger, needing to get more athletic. I think also they just need to have options, especially at the bottom of the lineup, that they can trust that can get on base. Look at what Muirfield did when he came into the fold. He was more necessarily contact than, on base, but he worked good at bats. J.P. Crawford has that type of potential. And if the Braves could potentially unlock whatever he did in 2023 on a consistent basis, you've got a guy that could really outperform his contract. So just another name that makes sense for the shortstop position. No, we're running a little long here, but hey, the topics that we're discussing, we could go for a few hours. We are wrapping up here, but one other position I would like to discuss. Me and Steven talked about back when we are back in a previous episode earlier this week, when we talked about the Joe Jimenez injury. Right-handed relief, especially a back-end option, is another underrated need for the Braves this offseason. And again, we talk about these teams that the Braves could be familiar with. We've talked about the fact that the Braves have hired Tim Hires as their hitting coach, but this week Atlanta has added 2 former members of the Giants front office to their own front office. So that means that this Braves team could be very interested in what the Giants have to offer in a potential trade. And Scott, there is one particular name who could fill that back end of the bullpen option as a right-hander. His name is Camilo Doval. He struggled last year, but is a perfect reclamation project. And we know Alex Anthopoulos loves those type of arms.
Yeah, and just to hit a point you made a moment ago, if folks didn't see it, the Braves did hire 2 front office executives from the San Francisco Giants. Of course, they have had a lot of front office overhaul. And based on some stuff I was reading from Giants fans, not that this is scientific, but it felt like they were 2 legitimate losses for the front office that the Braves were able to add. And I think anytime you bring over people from a front office, there's obviously a familiarity with players in that former organization. So with Doval, I think, he is a live arm, and really on the whole, his numbers this past season, it just looks like he was kind of unlucky. Doval's walk rate went up a bit, but his BABIP was the highest of its career by a ton. He had a 4.7 ERA, but his FIP and XFIP were in the mid 3s. This is a guy who is just truly electric when he is on the mound, gets a ton of strikeouts when he's right. So I think if the Braves are going to now try to fix the hole that Joe Jimenez has left, I think Doval is really an interesting arm, especially if he is made available, because clearly the Braves are going to have some familiarity with him based on the recent hires.
Yeah, I've always liked Doval. The dude throws so hard. I mean, he's a flamethrower. Those like 99, 100, 101. I don't fully get why the Giants would trade him. I don't know why you would trade low like this. I feel like that's a really bad asset management. I feel like he's absolutely due for a really good year next year, a bounce back year. And if you want to trade him then fine. But if the Giants are just giving him away, then absolutely, I'll take Camilo Doval in a heartbeat. Can you imagine that guy in the 8th inning? That would be unbelievable. Another guy that I like that I know Shawn was teeing up a second ago. And again, this is from the Cardinals. I know we had a lot of Cardinals on here, but again, the Cardinals are a fascinating team. Cardinals could burn it down starting tomorrow and their entire roster available. But Ryan Helsley of the Cardinals is a guy that I've loved for a long time. Massive, massive flamethrower. Averages, his fastball last year averaged 99.9 miles an hour. That was his average fastball. He threw, wow. I mean, he throws like legitimately 103, 104. When you throw that hard, obviously you're going to have command stuff pop up every once in a while. That's real. But, he's only got 1 more year of team control, which is another reason the Cardinals are probably going to trade him, is they're almost certainly not going to compete next year with the amount of money that they have to cut, amount of talent they're going to have to cut. They're probably not going to they're probably not going to keep him for another year when they lose him at the end. And that's a guy that could fill the right-handed power reliever spot that Joe Jimenez left. And I don't know what it would cost. It wouldn't be cheap because he's on a reasonable contract. I think his arbitration projection next year is like $7 million. But that's kind of the range the Braves keep their middle relievers in. That's what Pierce Johnson made. Jimenez was at $9 million. Aaron Bummer was going to be at $7 million before they restructured his deal. So like that, like between $5 and $10 million is kind of where the Braves are comfortable with relievers. Alex has never cared about spending money on relievers, even guys that aren't closers. So I think there is some sense to this deal. But yeah, I mean, the Braves need a power right-handed reliever, a high leverage power right-handed reliever. Doval, Helsley, I think they're gonna get somebody. Devin Williams, this guy Shawn and I talked about on our last show. Yeah. Stack multiple closers in your bullpen. That'd be awesome. That's one that would cost obviously more than even Helsley would. But yeah, these guys that make, between $5 and $10 million, especially with guys that they got 1 year on their deal, which incentivizes their current team to move them. I like these deals. These deals make a lot of sense to me. And I could definitely see Helsley being a Brave by the time we get to spring training.
And that's the thing about it, right? It's figuring out what's going to make sense when it comes to what the Braves are going to do as the offseason unfolds. And many of these names that we're talking about make sense right now. What happens when we start seeing some of these free agent signings? What happens when we start seeing more injury revelations? More names could become available. But as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, Scott, Stephen, going to throw it out to each of y'all one more time. Is there any other name that we have not mentioned that you think would make a lot of sense for the Braves? Any more Cardinals, any more Cubs, any more Mariners? Just a name or two that we've not mentioned that you think could make a lot of sense for the Braves this offseason.
I'll say this: if the Cardinals are actually going to sell, like hardcore sell, like to the studs, I'll take Brendan Donovan all day. I love that dude. I mean, another guy that can play all over the field. He played second base. He played third base. I think he played a bit of shortstop. I know he played left field and right field. Left-handed should be a theme that you're sensing here. Really good plate discipline, which, again, the Braves desperately need more of. Good walk totals. Really low strikeout guy. He was like a 12% strikeout guy last year, which is ridiculously low. I love Brendan Donovan. Now, that's a guy that the Cardinals probably shouldn't be trading because he's got so much team control. He's dirt cheap. But if they're truly turning it down to the studs and are just, everybody's open for business, then I'll take Brendan Donovan in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out one last name to wrap up. Give me a 2% chance on this one happening. But with the TV contract uncertainty, there is talk that the Texas Rangers might have to unload serious cash. But there's also reports that the Rangers might be really active in free agency. So which one is it? But if Corey Seager is even possibly available, I mean, what Seager could do as a left-handed bat at Truist Park, still plays a mighty fine shortstop. I mean, he would be, you want to talk about adding a superstar to the middle of your lineup. He is owed a ton of money. I have no idea what a prospect cost would be, but if there is any chance that Seager is made available by Texas, sign me up. I would be in the very front of the line for that one.
That's the most fun name that we've mentioned tonight. Corey Seager. Corey Seager on this team. I mean, it's never going to happen, but Corey Seager on this team would be. That would be. It's not going to happen, but that'd be unbelievable. I'll take that tomorrow.
Yeah. I'm going to revisit a team that, I think that we talked about a bit at the trade deadline, and that's the Tampa Bay Rays, who, it always seems like they're a bit in limbo, but there are still some names out there that are very intriguing to me. Some relievers, some arms that you potentially could go from relief to being a starter. I love Jose Siri from their outfield. I know he's a right-handed hitter, but he seems to be a profile that the Braves would love to potentially bring into the fold. And of course, Stephen, I know a name that you certainly love, but they wanted to stick him in left field. Don't necessarily know if he's a shortstop option, but Brandon Lau, I know they picked up his option. He would certainly be that left-handed bat that's just a proven, stud in that lineup. So looking at the Rays. So I think I've kept count. I think we have come close to 25 names tonight, but that's the whole point of this conversation. The Braves could go a ton of different directions for a ton of different reasons, and that's what makes the offseason so exciting. We should get more information, especially at the Braves side, to go the free agent route, but it definitely seems as if there's plenty of needs. Alex Anthopoulos is someone who loves to do things kind of in the shadows without a bunch of fanfare and information. So it's certainly going to be interesting to see what he does. Stephen or Scott, y'all have anything else as we wrap up this trade talk edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
Yeah, we named 25 names, and I guarantee you the moves Alex made won't include a single one of them. So we could have named 100 names, and that's what he does.
Yeah, it's legitimate. And, Alex he has thrown us some curveballs over the years. I mean, again, when I got the notification about Chris Sale, I think Brad and I did a show. I think I texted Brad. I was like, what the hell are they doing? Chris Sale? This guy's been healthy in a decade. And
Jorge Soler?
Yep. No one had Soler. We did a show for an hour trying to name the outfielder they were going to trade for. Now, he wasn't an outfielder, but no matter what, it should be a fun offseason. It should be a busy offseason. shortstop, corner outfielder, starting rotation, bullpen. Who knows if they get creative? Who knows if they add a backup catcher? They probably need a utility guy regardless. There's a lot of things this team has on its plate in the next 3 or 4 months. And as always, we'll be here. We're a 12-month podcast. And as soon as these deals go down, we always pride ourselves on doing an emergency show within a couple hours whenever we can.
Now, there's an easy solution to all this. It will devalue the conversation of this show. But, I mean, if the Braves just went out and signed Juan Soto and Corbin Burns on the same day, that takes care of a lot of things. I mean, that's your
it's not my money.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
I will happily
have more of my money if they do that. But
that's right. Yeah, I will pledge $20 to the Atlanta Braves Foundation if they want to sign Juan Soto.
I'll match. Yeah.
There we go.
Exactly. Hey, it's been an absolute blast. You can always check out great content such as this nearly 3-4 times a week on the Hammer Territory podcast feed here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you choose to listen. That's where we'll be for free. Part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Scott Coleman and Brad Rowland usually with you to start the week on Sundays, and then me and Steven, and a mixture of all four of us throughout the week. But until next time, plenty of off-season talk as things are really starting to ramp up. For Steven Tolbert and Scott Coleman, my name is Shawn Coleman. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.